I love parrots. They are so beautiful and dignified. What?
No, 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 no!
In order to keep this family friendly, let's just jump into the art. Hi, I'm Viv with Art with Viv, and welcome to my channel. Now I've got the parrot already traced out. I've got it on cold pressed paper, 140-pound arches, and it's not that big. It's probably a 8 by 5, something like that. It's not big. And I'm just taking some nice brownish yellow. I wet the background first and I just drop that in. Now I'm also adding a little bit more of the sort of a brownish gold color and just letting that water do its work. Now I used to have a friend who had a parrot, and let me tell you, that parrot was so mean. He would come down, she just let him stay loose in the house, and he had his own perch, but he couldn't fly. I think his wings were clipped. So he would get down off of his perch and he would come to whoever was new in the house, if a stranger came, and he would bite the crap out of them. He was so mean, but he was so smart. That was the funny part. So now I have wet his cheek again, still using some wet on wet. You will find that in this tutorial, wet on wet is going to be your friend. And I just dropped some nice bright yellow in there. He's got some really pretty yellow cheeks. Then I have a black mixture, which I just mixed with some blues and browns and a little bit of red to get a nice deep black mixture. And I'm painting in his eye. Don't forget, when you paint in eyes of any animal, any human, anybody or thing, make sure you leave a little white highlight in the pupil or across the iris. It gives it a little bit more life, and it just makes it look a little bit more realistic. So I painted in his pupil, but I left a tiny white dot in there, just a tiny piece of paper with no black paint. So now we're just going to work on the beak. Again, we are wet on wet. This is definitely a wet on wet everywhere technique. So I have wet his beak. I'm putting a little blue under painting on. I want that to sort of shine through the darker color, and it will act as one of my lightest shade tones, value shades, and it will also give me a nice base tone for his beak. So I have dropped that in. Now I'm putting a little brown around the edges. In the reference photo that I have, he has a little brown on his the bottom part of his beak. So now I'm just going ahead and adding a little bit more of a darker black color, which is not really black. It's, like I said, I mixed that black from some blue and some brown and a little bit of red. Now if you work really fast while it's wet, they'll blend beautifully. It gives some really nice blends, and that's what I like to do. You can see I'm mixing my blues and my brown there to get some more black, and I wanted it to be a little bit darker, so I added a little less water. Now I am wetting this area, and I am going to go ahead and put that black in there, that black mixture. Of course, I'm calling it black. It's not a true tube black. If you have tube black, use whatever you have. Don't fret. No tube black. All you have to do is mix up some blue with some red and brown, and you will have it. And notice how I'm making a few little marks on the edges, and that's just to indicate maybe some feathers. And I also went and lifted out a little bit of the black so that I'd have some highlights in there. And now I'm just adding the black patterns on his cheek. So I really love parrots. They're so colorful, so beautiful. They really are some of the smartest, most intelligent creatures that we have. Even though they have a little bit of a mean streak, some of them, not all, but all the ones I've ever been introduced to are just mean. They're just mean. So now I'm going in and getting the very back part of his mouth. It's in shadow, it's really dark, adding a little brown into that, and painting around his little tongue. He's got his little tongue all stuck out there, so cute. I think he is preening his feathers and getting himself ready for a date. He is single and ready to mingle, much like the ones at the beginning of the video. Oh my goodness. Now I took a little gray and green, or actually I mixed some of my black mixture with a little bit of sap green up there. And I got this sort of pale, really pale, watery green color for his eye. And I'm just painting the iris in, painting in the nostril, darkening it up some. He's really not that hard. I pretty much painted him like a puzzle piece almost. Just doing little pieces at a time with whatever color was appropriate according to the reference photo. So that's the thing. A couple things you want to remember when you're painting from a reference photo. You want to look at your reference photo more than you look at your painting. It's okay to take artistic license and, you know, change some things if you want. You don't have to copy a photo exactly. Now here I've got a nice bright yellow green, and I have wet his whole head, and I've just dropped in that green. I just applied it to the water and let it sort of spread out. And I'm cleaning off my palette so that I, you know, have a spot for my blue. And I'm just taking some really bright blue, and I am just going to go right along the edge of that green while they're still wet, because his feathers sort of naturally blend right there at the edge of the green and the blue. So that's all we're trying to do. We're just trying to get that nice little blendy edge. And notice I brought some of the blue down onto his forehead and a few little dots. Again, this almost whole thing was done using wet on wet technique. And I'm going to continue around and work on the rest of him with this blue. And in some areas, as you see, I am lifting up some of the blue. So I'm just going to let you watch and enjoy some music for a second. Now while the blue was wet on his body, notice I did drop in some yellow and green. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Now I have sort of a pinky brown, and I'm going around his nostril. He has sort of a pinky color there, so I am using sort of a little bit of rose with some brown mixed together to go in there and define his nostril and some shadow work around that. I'm using my smallest number 2 brush. Well, it's probably not my smallest, but it's the smallest of that particular set. And I am using a Creative Mark Mimic. Let's see, Creative Mark Mimic Faux Squirrel watercolor brushes. That's what I'm using. And I bought the set. I'll link them below in case you're interested. I really love these. They are probably my favorite now. You know, sometimes I go through favorites, you know, like this might be my favorite this time, and next month might be a different favorite. But so far I have stuck with these for a while. Now these aren't my favorite for doing really fine details. Lowell Cornell are my favorite, the ultra round pointed. The only drawback with those is they don't hold as much water and paint, but they will give you a crisp fine detail like no other brush. But for this, I'm not needing a lot of fine detail, so I'm sticking with my mimics, my Creative Mark Mimic brushes. Alright, I am just working on his eye and adding a little bit more dark shadow around there. I've let his beak dry and I'm wetting it again. make sure when you get the first layer dry, this is important. Once you apply your first layer, make sure you let it dry completely before you wet it again so that you don't disturb that layer. And I am just going in and adding a little bit more of that black mixture. You'll notice that in the black mixture on my palette, I don't have as much water because I want it to be thicker and I want it to be darker. So I used less water, more pigment for the mixture. Wet that beak and dropped it in, and tried to get more of the paint where I had darker shadows, less paint where it was lighter, obviously. And then if I needed to, I just would dab my brush off on my paper towel and just lift up some of that paint while it was still wet. So I'm working pretty fast. Of course, I've got the video sped up so that you won't be watching 3 hours of video. But yeah, so just take care when you're doing layers that you let each layer dry in between. Now I'm adding a little bit more brown to that bottom beak half, his bottom beak, and just mixing a little bit of the blue that I used for his feathers and a little bit of the grayish blackish color that I used for his beak, and making sort of a shadow color for that white patch on his cheek. And we wet his cheek, and I'm just dropping it in very pale, very light, adding a few shadows up around his eyes and up on his little near his little nostril. But we want these to be faint. We don't want it to overpower the white. We want the white to still look like white, so we don't want to introduce too much color to it at this point. So now I am just blending in some of that beak, that dark black beak color, and I have switched to a larger brush and just working on around that highlight, trying to get it looking a little more three-dimensional, adding a few more details to his white cheek while still trying to keep it white, and just working on some highlights. I'm going to be quiet for just a second, and I'm going to let you enjoy some music and let you watch. Now I've started to add some more detail to his forehead with a little bit of darker green. It's got a little bit more blue in it and less yellow, just sort of giving it some texture right there on his forehead. I used a darker green right there at the base of his forehead, right above his beak, his nostrils, just to give it some shadow. And I'm just really working out some details there, just giving it texture. Going in and putting another layer on his little yellow cheeks, giving him some blush. Like I said, he is single and ready to mingle, so we have got to get his makeup on him, get his little blush going, get him looking good. Or her, I don't know. Could be either one, but he's going to be looking good no matter what. Now I'm I'm painting in the lines on his tongue. He has some very defined tongue lines. And then I'm going to come back and I'm just going to use some darker blues on dry paper. Now this is the part where it is wet on dry, the paper is dry. I'm just defining those feathers, sort of painting around them, adding some shadows and getting that feather detail in there. And I will let you watch just for a second and enjoy the music, because I know you don't want to hear me talk the whole time. So basically what I'm doing is just defining the feathers using some of the darker blue with a little bit of the beak color mixture in there for the shadows. Now on his other wing, you see where I added the yellow, I'm coming back in there with some of that darker brown that I used in the background and just sort of put in some more shadow work. Also softened his blush, I'm calling it his blush on his little cheek. Now I'm really going in there with some really dark, sort of a rusty color, orange, brownish color, and putting in the shadows. Also, you'll notice how that green just sort of blended really well with that blue on our first layer. And now again, I'm just defining his feathers. I want to say I'm defining his leaves because I paint so many flowers, but it's feathers, people. He's got feathers, not leaves. Okay, so we are just sort of, I'm blending in some areas using some just clear water, adding a little more blue to some of the feathers, darkening up the shadows, and just sort of blending it all in with the tip of my brush. I'm not being real careful about it. I'm not being precise. I just want to give the indication of some feathers. You don't have to draw every detail for people to know that those are feathers and this is a bird. So, don't stress yourself out over that. You don't have to have the exact colors that I'm using. Use whatever you have. You can paint your parrot any color scheme you would like. It's your parrot, and that is the beauty of art. So now I'm coming back in and I am really darkening up that area there, that orangey yellow area, rusty orange, because there is a good shadow, a nice dark shadow there. So I am taking some of that black, or that, it's really blue and brown mixture, but we're calling it black, and really getting in there and making those really dark details, those really dark shadows, because that makes the lighter feathers really pop. And I'm just sort of blending out around his nose with some clear water. Now I'm going to come down here and shade his tongue a little bit. And his tongue is sort of curled down into his lower bill. So the highlight is actually going across the middle of his tongue. So it's shadowed at the top and shadowed at the bottom. Pay attention to your reference photo. Notice where your shadows are. Notice where your highlights are. That is the biggest thing to making your paintings three-dimensional. Alright, so I am wetting this again. I let it dry. I'm wetting it again. And I'm just going to add a little bit more blue, a few more, just a little bit more color. And I'm going to be quiet and just let you watch. I don't think I have to explain this part. You've got this. So I'm taking some of my bleed-proof white right here, and I just went across his back feathers just to lighten them up a little bit. I'm taking my scrubber brush and just scrubbing down one side of his beak because there is some light reflecting off of it. Now I'm just darkening up the area to define his beak right under his nose, or right under his nostrils. So I put a little dark line there, darkening up the tip of his beak, underneath his tongue, and just trying to get in some of those details. I'm using a little hog bristle scrub brush, and I'm actually wetting it with clean water and lifting up some of the paint where I felt like it needed to be lighter. Maybe I got a little happy with the paint. Sometimes that happens. And now I am, and so I just need to scrub some of it up. So I've done that. Now I'm taking a little bleed proof white. You can use whitewash, and I'm just putting in some highlights where I think I need them. And just adding a little bit of shadow work here and there, just on the feathers. We are almost finished with this thing. He has turned out really pretty. I think he will get a date. I'm almost certain of it because we have painted him so beautifully. Him is beautiful. Okay, so now I'm just finishing up details here and there, just really trying to get that highlight on his tongue and really define. I went ahead and got a micro ink pen, micron, and I'm just lightly drawing in those lines because the white sort of overtook them. And I also decided to darken up his pupil a little bit to make it really look black. So I'm just gonna remove this tape here and look at it, see what I think, see if I see anywhere where it might just need a little bit of help. And I think his little cheeks, when I look closer at the reference photo, I see he has these sort of like vein-like structures. Not sure if they're veins or what they are. So I'm just lightly painting those in with really pale blue, and then just sort of adding some shadows around his eye, darkening up some of those black markings on his face. And we are almost finished with this dude. He has really been fun to paint. I hope you give him a try, and if you know someone that loves art as much as we do, then please by all means share this video, give me a thumbs up, give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. It helps me so much. Thank you for watching.